number 14 a try. This one says Barbara has a mixed garden that has 16 rows of different flowers and vegetables. 1/4 of the rows are lettuce, 1/8 of the rows are pumpkins, and 1/2 of the rows are red tulips. The other rows are carrots. How many rows of carrots are there in Barbara's garden? So hopefully you guys started out with cubes. We go back and circle the numbers in units. So 16 rows of different flowers and vegetables. 1/4, and this gets a little bit confusing because 1/4 is written out like words, whereas the other ones are written out like fractions. So it gets a little bit confusing. But 1/4 of the rows are lettuce. 1/8 of the rows are pumpkins. 1/2 of the rows are red tulips. Then it's asking me to underline. It says the other rows are carrots, so that's another unit. Underline the question. How many rows of carrots are in Barbara's garden? All right, then we're going to box in the keywords. Barbara has a mixed garden. It has 16 rows of different flowers. 1/4 1/4 of the rows are lettuce. 1/8 of the rows are pumpkins. 1/2 of the rows are red tulips. I'll make this a little bit bigger to see. Okay, so, and then the other rows are carrots. So I'm going to box in other because that's going to tell me that I need to do something to figure out how many carrots there are. So that's going to be my keyword that I'm going to look at. Now I'm going to evaluate. So I'm going to take my notes like I love to do, and I'm going to think about the different types of flowers and vegetables that are in Barbara's garden. So I know that there is lettuce. I know there are pumpkins. I know there are red tulips. And I know there are carrots. I also know that there are 16 total rows. So now let's go back. 1/4 of the rows are lettuce. So I'm going to put a 1/4 next to my lettuce. 1/8 of the rows are pumpkins. So I'm going to put 1/8 next to pumpkins. 1/2 are red tulips. And then the other rows, so basically the rest of the rows, are going to be carrots. So now it's my job to figure out how many rows that actually means. Well, if I think about how we can figure out the fraction of a whole, remember that I can take my whole number, divide it by the denominator to get my number in each group. Okay, so I'm going to start with my lettuce. 1/4 of 16 is the same as 16 divided into 4 groups. 16 divided by 4 equals 4. So I know there are 4 rows, of lettuce. All right, the pumpkins are 1/8 of the rows. 1/8 of 16 would be 16, my whole number, divided into 8 groups. 16 divided by 8 equals 2. So 1/8 of the rows is pumpkins. That means 2 rows are pumpkins. Well, for the red tulips, half of those rows are tulips. That is a lot of tulips. Half of 16. That's the same as saying 16 split into 2 groups with 8 in each group. So there would be 8 rows of red tulips. Now the rest of the rows are going to be carrots. So I know that there are 16 rows total, and I know that this is the amount of rows of lettuce, pumpkins, and red tulips. And if I add those together, 4 plus 2 plus 8, I can quickly make a 10. Plus 4 equals 14. So I know there are 14 rows of lettuce, pumpkin, and red tulips. Now I need to figure out how many rows of carrots there are. Think for a second. What do you think the next step is going to be? Hopefully you said I'm going to take the 16 rows total and I'm going to subtract the 14 rows of lettuce, pumpkins, and tulips to figure out there are 2 rows of carrots. So let's check to see if this answer is reasonable. How many rows of carrots are in Barbara's garden? So I think there are 2 rows of carrots in Barbara's garden based on all the steps that I did here. But I can check to see if my answer is reasonable because all of the rows of all the fruits and, all the vegetables and flowers should add up to 16 because there's 16 total rows. Well, let's see. 8 and 2 would be 10. 4 and 2 would be 6. If I add my 10 and my 6 together, I end up with 16 total rows. So I know my answer is reasonable. I hope that helps.